let's get started. Next up is Dr. Mark Fisher. Pfeiffer, I just renamed him.
I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never Fisher. All right, I'm Mark Pfeiffer, and for the next session, we're going to talk about the question, is ISIS Islamic? There's two competing messages out there. One we get from some of our politicians in Washington and some of the Muslim spokespeople on news stations who say that Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance and respect for human rights and would never sanction the kind of activities that we see from ISIS. On the other hand, we have the very obvious fact that the first two letters of ISIS stand for Islamic State, and although I have not yet conducted a poll, I feel pretty confident that if we polled ISIS fighters, we'd get a 100% response that say, yes, I am a good, authentic Muslim. So we're going to look at this question in some depth, and hopefully you'll have a greater understanding for where some of this fits into a greater context. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the most fundamental Islamic theological doctrine, where it all starts, and that is the doctrine of Tawheed. Tawheed is an Arabic word that means the absolute unity and oneness of Allah. The absolute unity and oneness of Allah. All of Islamic theology, jurisprudence, and philosophic work proceeds from this understanding of Tawheed. This is the thing that underlines most of Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and philosophy. So, the doctrine of Tawheed grew out of the context of 7th century Arabia, when Muhammad was born and lived. Muhammad was born into a culture of polytheism, where various nomadic tribes worshipped multiple gods, goddesses, higher goddesses, lower gods. It was a whole pantheon of gods. And so this very, very strict Islamic monotheism was a reaction against that. Also, it was a reaction against the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. So once Muhammad had established this doctrine of Tawheed, of course, he had to oppose the Christian doctrine of the Trinity as well. Now, just as a little side note, it's not really part of the talk today, but the Quran makes a mistake when describing the Christian Trinity. It says that the Christian Trinity is the Father, the Son, and Mary. Now, where would Muhammad have gotten that idea? Well, he got it from the Christians with whom he was familiar. They were called Ebionites. The Ebionites were a Christian heretical sect, of course no longer exists, and they had their own gospel, one book that they regarded as authoritative, the gospel according to the Hebrews. And that gospel is not extant anymore, it's gone. But we know about the Ebionites and the gospel according to the Hebrews because the early church fathers wrote in opposition to them and wrote in opposition to some of the doctrines that they held, one of which was a trinity of the Father, Son, and Mary. So it's pretty clear that Muhammad thought the Ebionites represented Orthodox Christianity, and so the Quran purports to correct all Christians for this particular version of the Trinity. In any event, Tawheed colors everything having to do with Islam. The absolute oneness of everything. Everything that exists is Allah's. Everything that exists is under Allah's rule and under Allah's sovereignty. There is only one religion in the world, and that's Allah's religion, Islam. Again, there can only be one religion because the oneness, the doctrine of Tawheed. The Quran is said to speak to every human situation, and Sharia law governs every human action. There's a unity to the whole thing. There can be no distinction between church and state. I'm sure you heard some of this from Joe this morning. There can be no distinction between church and state because that implies a duality rather than a unity. So there's no distinction between church and state, sacred and secular, or anything else. The doctrine of Tawheed means that everything is one big unified whole. Culture, society, education, politics, commerce, everything. Otherwise, you violate the doctrine of Tawheed. So the word Islam means submission. This means that everything is submitted to Allah's will. Even rocks, trees, rivers, and mountains. Everything is submitted to the will of God. If it does not currently appear to be so, as it does not, because there are lots of places in the world that are not submitted to Allah and do not have Sharia as their law, this is only a temporary situation. It's only temporary. Eventually and inevitably, the entire world will be Muslim, submitted to the will of God, and everything having to do with humanity will be Muslim. So, let's skip to our next topic, which is jihad. Now, jihad is not just a bloodlust, violent hatred of everything that's not Muslim. No, it's got a point. There's a purpose in jihad. Jihad is the violent, if necessary, struggle to expand that part of the world that is submitted to Allah. You start from a Muslim land, a Muslim country, an area that is fully submitted to Allah, including Sharia law, and you expand that until eventually the whole world is Muslim. So jihad and this struggle is all about bringing into reality the doctrine of Tawheed, such that eventually the entire world is Muslim. Now, the Quran is very, very clear that jihad is the normal state of affairs for the Muslim community. This is not an optional thing, it's an integral part of Islam because Tawheed is an integral part of Islam. So here are a few verses from the Quran that talk about jihad. Fight them until there is no more disbelief, and the religion will all be for Allah alone in the entire world. Fight those who don't believe in Allah or in the last day or have forbidden that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth. Even if they are people of the book, which is Christians and Jews, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So what this means is Muslims are to fight all non-Muslims with the exception of Christians and Jews. We're given a choice that other religious people or non-Muslims are not given. We have a choice of staying Christian or Jew, provided that we pay a very heavy tax that's designed to humiliate us. So we will pay a heavy tax to the ruling Muslim authority. This is called jizya in Islam. We can keep our lives if we will pay the jizya. Everybody else either converts or dies. But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war, unless they convert to Islam. Fight them until persecution is no more and religion be only for Allah. Are they seeking a religion other than Allah's when every soul in the heavens and the earth has submitted to Him, willingly or by compulsion? So there are more than 100 verses in the Quran talking about fighting and killing and attacking non-Muslims. And all of this, again, is with a point to expand the control of Islam until the entire world has become Muslim. Now, I want to go on and show you a few verses from the Hadith. The Hadith is often not talked about in all of these discussions, but the Quran teaches that Muhammad is the perfect model for all humanity, and that he who obeys Muhammad obeys Allah. And so Muslims are taught that to be a good Muslim, you must imitate Muhammad in every respect possible, in every way possible, including how he brushed his teeth, how he went to the bathroom, with which foot he entered the restroom with. Muhammad wore a beard without a mustache. And so that's why you see so many Muslim men around the world that wear a beard without a mustache. They're imitating Muhammad. So the Hadith are oral traditions about things that Muhammad said or did or tacitly approved of, so that Muslims know how to live and behave. The Quran doesn't give them much instruction, but in the Hadith they get minute details. So to understand a lot of what Muslims think, how they behave, what they believe, why they do things, you have to turn to the Hadith. So let's look at a few verses from the Hadith on jihad. The Messenger of Allah said, this is Muhammad, I've been commanded to fight against people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and they establish prayer and pay zakat, which is an obligatory charity. So Muhammad says, I've been commanded to fight people until there's no religion but Islam. Allah's apostle said, I've been ordered to fight the people until they say none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. And if they say so, pray like our prayers, face our Qibla, and slaughter as we slaughter, then their blood and property will be sacred to us, and we will not interfere with them. The apostle said, I have been ordered to fight against people until they have testified that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's apostle, etc. So Muhammad makes very, very clear that a good Muslim should fight unbelievers until the entire world confesses that Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his prophet. Which, incidentally, the first pillar of the 5 pillars of Islam is the confession of faith, which in English is there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. Now, I want to give you one quote from a Quranic commentary. There's a verse in the Quran that many of you have probably heard quoted on the news by Muslim apologists. And this verse is Surah 2, verse 256, which says, there is no compulsion in religion. No one can be compelled to believe anything. They believe freely whatever they want. When Muslim apologists quote this verse, they're trying to deceive you. In the Quran, anytime there is a contradiction between two verses, the latter revealed verse cancels the earlier verse. So this verse, there is no compulsion in religion, is no longer effective. It's been canceled by a later verse. And they know that you don't know that, and so they think they can deceive you. So Ibn Kathir is an Islamic Quranic commentator, and he is commenting on this no compulsion in religion verse and the fact that it has been abrogated or canceled. And he says this, therefore, all people of the world should be called to Islam. If any one of them refuses to do so or refuses to pay the jizya, they should be fought until they are killed. All right? So this is the way that Tawheed gives rise to jihad. Now, there are a couple of side matters that I want to mention to you here, and that is some of the information that you hear about jihad being that there's a greater jihad and a lesser jihad. The greater jihad being an inner struggle to be a good Muslim. That's not Islam. All right? That is not an Islamic doctrine. That was mentioned by the equivalent of an Islamic preacher one time. And it was sort of like a good sermon point. And it has been picked up by modern Muslims in the West to try to soften the idea of jihad within Islam. It's not a part of traditional Islamic theology. So do not buy the greater jihad, lesser jihad idea. There's just one jihad, and it's the one that we've been talking about. There is a distinction, however, between offensive jihad and defensive jihad. Offensive jihad is the effort to spread the boundaries and territory of Islam. That is a communal obligation, which means all Muslims do not have to engage in it, provided somebody is engaging in it on behalf of the Islamic community. So Muslims can be good Muslims by sitting at home and not participating in offensive jihad, provided somebody is engaging in it on their behalf. Defensive jihad is the obligation of every able-bodied Muslim, so that if some non-Muslim force is attacking the Islamic community, then everybody is obligated to defend Islam. But so this is one reason. There are other reasons, but this is one reason why you have a lot of Muslims around the world that don't engage in jihad, because Islam does not require them to. Someone else is engaging in it on their behalf. Now, I also want to introduce the next section by talking about the caliphate. When Muhammad died, his successors were called caliphs, successors to Muhammad. They are political rulers, autocrats of the Islamic community. So they're in a proper Islamic government. There is a caliph, or in English we call it a caliph, khalifa, in charge, ruling the Islamic community. And the territory that the caliph controls, that Islam controls, is called the caliphate. So, when Muhammad died, the first caliph was Abu Bakr. And within a very short period of time after Muhammad died, Abu Bakr led the Muslims in what's called the Ridda Wars. The word Ridda means apostasy, those who have fallen away from Islam. So when Muhammad died, some of the nomadic Arab tribes that had become Muslim thought to themselves, well, Muhammad's dead, the party's over, we'll go back to the way we used to believe. Some of the Arab tribes said, no, we're still Muslim, but we're not sending our taxes to Medina anymore. We sent taxes to Muhammad, but we're not sending our taxes to Medina anymore. And then there were other Arab tribes on the Arabian Peninsula that never had converted to Islam. Well, on his deathbed, Muhammad said, eradicate any religion on the Arabian Peninsula except Islam. So Abu Bakr led the Muslim warriors, and they one by one conquered the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula until they were all Muslim. However, these tribal warriors were not ones to sit at home idly. And so when they finished conquering the Arabian Peninsula, they just kept going. And they eventually, well, that's a poor map. That doesn't look very good, does it? This is the Arabian Peninsula. This darker purple was the Persian Empire of Zoroastrians, and then this lighter purple was the Byzantine Empire. And so the Muslim warriors just kept going, and they began to attack these adjoining areas, defeating the Persian armies and the Byzantine armies, and they just kept going. So these Muslim warriors conquered well over into Iran, Afghanistan, some of the stands, and they weren't able to completely take out the Byzantine Empire for some centuries. But they took a lot of Byzantine territory through the Middle East and across North Africa. Now, here's another little side note. Did I do that? No. Oh. This is where the Crusades come in. You know, we're taught the Crusades were such an awful, terrible thing. And on one level, they were. But on the other hand, the Crusades were launched by European Christians to try to take back the Holy Land that had been under Christian control for so long. So the Crusades were a response to this Muslim aggression, taking Jerusalem, taking these Christian lands. Just a little side note for you to put the Crusades in context. So the Muslim warriors continued expanding. They kept going. And the only reason they stopped was because they finally were defeated. Once they finished with North Africa, they turned north and they crossed the Mediterranean over into Spain. Now here's a little bit of trivia for you. You know about the Rock of Gibraltar? Where does the word Gibraltar come from? Well, the name of the Muslim general that led the Muslim forces into Spain, his name was Tariq. Tariq in Arabic. Tariq. There is an Arabic word that means hill, and that word is Jabal. So the Rock of Gibraltar was called the Hill of Tariq, Jabal Tariq, Jabal Tariq, Jabal Tariq, until it became Gibraltar. So that's where that word comes from, right? So the Muslim warriors conquered Spain. They continued into France, all the way up here to Tours. And in the mid-700s, they were finally stopped by the forces of Charles Martel at Tours, more than halfway up into France, and were finally driven back down into Spain, where there was an Islamic empire that ruled Spain until King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella drove them back into North Africa in the year 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. All right? Now, eventually, Islam consolidated its territory. It went through a series of different dynasties, this Muslim caliphate, until we come to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans controlled this caliphate for many, many centuries, based in Istanbul, Turkey. But the Ottomans continued to try to expand their territory whenever they could. When they were powerful enough, they expanded. When the armies surrounding them were more powerful than they held back, tried to garner their forces to get stronger. And so, unbeknownst to most people, the Ottoman Empire was trying to conquer Europe as late as the late 1700s. This pink, this is the Ottoman Empire. So they controlled a lot of southeastern Europe, and in 1683, were trying to lay siege to Vienna, Austria. Reading about that campaign, it turned on a dime. It turned on a dime. And the European Christian kings were able to defeat the Ottoman Empire at Vienna in 1683, or Europe would be Muslim today. But only just a few hundred years ago, this caliphate was continuing to try to spread. Now, moving to the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was weakened through the years. This is a map that just shows some of the territory that they had lost during the 1800s. Different colors show different places that they had lost. So the Ottoman Empire was weakening, and then their final death knell was choosing to side with the Central Powers during World War I. They sided with the losing side, and so when World War I was over, the victorious European countries split up the Ottoman Empire into the countries of the Middle East and North Africa that we know today. Those countries have only existed about 100 years. Before that, they were part of the Ottoman Empire. So we split them up, or the Europeans split them up into all these different countries in the Middle East today. For Muslim theologians and thinkers, this was humiliating, debasing. It was inconceivable that the godless, pagan European powers could so slice up the Ottoman Empire and bring an end to the caliphate. It was just totally unthinkable to Muslim scholars. So they began to ask themselves, how could this happen? We have the one true God on our side. We have the one true religion on our side. God is always victorious over his enemies. How could this have happened? And they developed a theological, philosophical idea called Salafism. Salafism. What a Salaf is Arabic for a righteous ancestor, and it refers to the first 3 generations of Muslims after Muhammad. And remember what they had accomplished. In 3 generations, they had conquered the Arabian Peninsula, the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, and part of Europe. So the answer was to get back to the Islam of the Salafs. So a Muslim who buys into this idea is called a Salafi, and the idea is called Salafism. Now there's various types of Salafis. One type simply says we need to throw off all non-Islamic influence. All this Western influence, Western movies, books, culture, we need to get rid of all of that and purify our Islam. So they're not necessarily violent. Salafis said, in addition to all of that, which we agree with, we also need to get back to jihad. Because the Salafs, the first 3 generations of Muslims, were very aggressive in launching campaigns to conquer the non-Muslims around them. So, Salafism was born in the 20th century, and it has several goals, this violent one in particular. First, our ultimate goal is to recreate the caliphate, reconquer the territories that the Ottoman Empire had controlled, reestablish the caliphate under a caliph or khalifa under Sharia law. Now, the way to do that is to weaken these Muslim countries. All these Muslim countries that have been established after World War I and are illegitimate, we need to weaken them and overthrow them, and then put these countries, as we overthrow them, together to recreate the caliphate. Now, you might ask, well, wait a minute, aren't these Muslim countries? Well, they are, but according to the Salafs or the Salafis, they're illegitimate. They're illegitimate for two reasons. The first reason is they are ruled by presidents or kings. That's not a proper Islamic government. Number two, they don't implement Sharia. When these countries were cut up after World War I, European colonists controlled them. Britain, France, Belgium. They colonized these Muslim countries. And so these European colonial powers brought their own legal systems. The only aspects of Sharia that these European powers allowed to stay in place was the Sharia rules regarding worship, such as how to pray, how to fast, how to give alms, the Hajj to Mecca. Rules regarding worship, they let the Muslims keep. But all other law was European colonial law. When these Muslim countries gained their independence from the European powers, they kept the European legal system. They did not implement Sharia in all areas of life, like a legitimate Muslim country would do. So the Salafis see these Muslim governments as illegitimate because they don't implement Sharia and they don't have an Islamic form of government. So the Salafis hope to overthrow these governments. And so we're going to turn and look at the first major Salafi organization in the 20th century, which is the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. This is Hassan al-Banna. He founded the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. This gentleman is named Syed Qutb. Q-U-T-B is the way we render that in English. Qutb. He is the theological, philosophical godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood. This gentleman right here was sent by the Egyptian government to the United States to study our education system. While here, he attended Colorado State University and he visited churches. He visited a particular church, and it was a Friday night sleepover by the youth group. So the youth group had a sleepover, a lock-in, in the gym, and Syed Qutb could not believe what he saw. Men and women, boys and girls, sleeping side by side in their sleeping bags on the floor of the gym. That was too much for him to take. He couldn't stand that thought that we could be so godless. And so he went back and became a radical and joined the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood was very severely oppressed and persecuted by the Egyptian government. And at various times in the 20th century, all the leaders were put in jail and were tortured. Some of them left Egypt and went to Saudi Arabia and taught in their universities and public schools and grew up a whole generation of what we would call jihadis, who then went and led to the development of the Taliban in the madrasas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I won't go into any more detail about that. You understand what's happened with that. Al-Qaeda is another Salafi organization. And what they try to do is within each country, destabilize it, weaken it, until they can overthrow it, as we've talked about. 20th century terrorism against the United States and the West began as an effort to weaken these Muslim countries. They were all supported by American military bases in many of these countries, American economic support, and so forth. And so these Salafi groups realized they were going to have a hard time overthrowing the Muslim countries as long as they were supported by the United States. So they began to attack U.S. military interests in the Middle East, hoping to drive us out, to make the cost too high, to make the American public squeamish and say, we got to get out of those countries and leave them alone, so that these Salafi groups could then take control. Let's see, do I have something on? No. Mentioning briefly the Arab Spring, a gift horse to the Salafis. Overthrowing some of these countries, leaving a power vacuum, and who do you think jumped in? The Salafi groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They're back. They took control of Egypt when Hosni Mubarak was overthrown. So a Salafi group on its way to recreating the caliphate was now in charge of the most populous Arab country in the world. Fortunately, they overplayed their hand and the people got rid of them, so that today the Egyptian military is in charge of Egypt. So what happened with ISIS? Let me see what this next slide is. ISIS used to be a part of Al-Qaeda. But this gentleman, al-Baghdadi, and some of his cohort believed that the Al-Qaeda plan was too slow to overthrow country by country and then unifying those countries. They believed, let's just start taking territory wherever we can within a country, declaring that the caliphate, and then from that base we will expand. So ISIS has taken advantage of the situation in Iraq and Syria to declare we've got the caliphate again. Here we are, recreating the Ottoman Empire first, from which then we will take over the whole world, but we now have land that was once a part of the Ottoman Empire, the caliphate, and we're implementing full Sharia law under a caliph. This guy, al-Baghdadi. So the ISIS group broke off from Al-Qaeda over strategy. ISIS thinking Al-Qaeda's plan is too long term and we don't have to wait that long. So ISIS is just the latest permutation, the latest manifestation of the effort of jihadis to conquer the world for Islam. So from a macro perspective, is ISIS Islamic? Of course they are. They're quintessentially Islamic. They are the reincarnation of the first three generations of Muslims and every Muslim since then. So there's no question that ISIS is Islamic. So let's ask another question. And this is where the rubber hits the road. What about the barbaric practices that ISIS commits? Are those Islamic? The beheadings, the burnings, the rapings, the crucifixion, are those practices Islamic? Is there authority for those practices? Well, let's see. First, let's look at the issue of beheading. Here's what the Quran says. The recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and their feet be cut off from opposite sides, or be exiled from the land. This is their disgrace in this world, and a great torment is theirs in the hereafter. Now, for the sake of time, we're not going to go into the commentaries and the Sharia and everything over the word killed. But that word is interpreted to mean beheading. And there it is, crucified. Right? Hands and feet be cut off from opposite sides. Now, Ibn Kathir, you remember the commentator we referenced earlier. Here's the way he interprets wage war. Wage war mentioned here means oppose and contradict, and it includes disbelief. So if you disbelieve in Islam, these punishments are appropriate for you. Now, some Muslim apologists will tell you, well, you have to understand the context in which the revelation was given. What was the reason that this revelation came down? And you can't properly interpret the Quran unless you understand the context in which the verse came. And so let's look at the context here. The context for this verse is as follows. 8 men from a different tribe came to visit Muhammad in Medina. They became Muslims. The power and charisma of Muhammad's personality or some such, they became Muslims. However, they got ill. Turista or who knows what. Muhammad said, okay, here's what you do. You go outside of town where my shepherds are, and you drink the milk and the urine of the camels, and you'll get well. So apparently these guys followed that advice. They went outside of Medina, met with the shepherd, they drank the milk and the urine of the camels, and somehow miraculously they got better. Whereupon they murdered the shepherd and drove off all the camels. And then they hightailed it out of there. Muhammad heard about it, sent a party to track them down, which they did, and they brought them back to Muhammad. So Muhammad ordered that their hands and their feet be cut off, their eyes to be gouged out with hot pieces of iron, and then they were to be thrown on these piles of volcanic rock that surround the city of Medina. Whereupon the hot desert sun beat down upon them, they begged and pleaded for water. Water was denied them until they died from their injuries and exposure. So then this verse was revealed because apparently Muhammad was just too cruel and barbaric. And God wanted to rein him in a little bit and said, hey, look, just behead them or crucify them or cut off their hands and their feet. No need to do all that extra torture and stuff. So that was the context for the revelation of this verse. So when ISIS beheads, they're following Allah's orders. When they crucify, they're following what the Quran tells them to do. And they're not as bad as the context that I just gave you. They're being merciful. Okay? So then let's go back to Sayyid Qutb. You remember we mentioned him in connection with the Muslim Brotherhood. Here is his commentary. He wrote a commentary on the Quran, which is very, very popular among the more radical jihadi type Muslims. The crime to which this legislative statement refers involves rebellion against a Muslim ruler who implements the laws of Islam. Such rebels do not merely fight the ruler or the community, but they make war on God and his messenger, since they fight God's law. There is no worse corruption than the attempt to prevent the implementation of divine law. If you fight against the effort to implement Sharia, this verse applies to you and its punishments. All right. A couple of more Quranic verses on beheading. When your Lord revealed to the angels, I am with you, therefore make firm those who believe. I will cast terror into their hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. If you encounter the disbelievers in a battle, strike off their heads. Take them as captives when they are defeated. So, very clear instruction in the Quran. What about the example of Muhammad? In addition to the Quran, there's also the Hadith. And in the Hadith, we have, and in other sources, an example of Muhammad beheading. How's my time?
You have a couple more minutes.
Couple of more minutes.
About 5.
5?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. I can hear Steve saying, I see some of my time. No, never mind. All right, so briefly, there was a Jewish tribe in Medina, and due to some circumstances that we will skip, Muhammad decided he wanted to be rid of them. And so he ordered his believers to dig a trench in the center of Medina, and he ordered that all the men be beheaded. How did they know exactly whether a boy had reached puberty or not? They checked for pubic hair. If he had pubic hair, he was beheaded along with all the men. Depending on the source, either 600 or 900 men were beheaded that day. The women and the children were taken as slaves. Of course, Muhammad always got his first pick among the women, and they became his sex slaves, which we're going to come to really quickly. So that is a perfect example of Muhammad beheading. What about burning? Remember the Jordanian fighter pilot who was burned to death? There is another account where Muhammad and the Muslims attacked a Jewish village. And after conquering the Jewish village, they could not locate the town treasure. So they found the guy in charge of guarding the town treasure. And Muhammad ordered that he be tortured until he give up the location of the town treasure. His name is Kinana, in case anyone is interested. So they built a fire on the man's chest. And when he was almost dead, depending, either he gave up the source, the location, or he didn't. There's contrary accounts in historical sources. But when he was almost dead, then they went ahead and beheaded him. So that's an authority in the life of Muhammad for burning the Jordanian pilot. What about rape? Also forbidden to you Muslim men are women already married, except those captives and slaves whom your right hands possess. Thus has Allah ordained for you. I actually have a good bit of material here, but in the interest of time, let me just summarize it for you. The Quran allows a man to marry up to 4 women at any one time. We've already seen that it's very easy to divorce a woman. You just say, talaq, talaq, talaq. I divorce you 3 times, and they're out with nothing. And then he can replace her with another woman. In addition to those wives, a man is also entitled to keep sex slaves from among women that he might take captive after a battle. The sources say that the Muslim soldiers were a little bit hesitant to rape the women with their husbands watching. Muhammad got a revelation that said, when the woman is taken captive, her marriage is canceled and nullified. So you may go ahead and rape her. All right? More authority in the Quran for this sex slavery and raping captives. Sex slavery in addition to what we've already seen. So, I know I went through that real fast at the end. But so far, I haven't seen anything that ISIS has done that doesn't have clear and authoritative teaching in the Quran or the Hadith or in the model of Muhammad from his biographies. And so ISIS not only is Islamic in the broader sense, in the macro sense, but they're also following the very clear teachings of the Islamic authoritative scriptures. So to the question, is ISIS Islamic? Yes, they're very clearly Islamic. And that is what you can expect anytime a Muslim force takes over new territory anywhere in the world, is exactly what ISIS is doing. Okay, thank you very much.
Who's got a question?
Q&A. Yes, sir. Oh, you got to take that.
No.
Quick one. Was the Iranian Revolution of 1978 a Salafist effort?
Debatable. I think there is a completely different set of Sharia. There's a different corpus of Sharia law followed by the Shiites. And Shia theology is a good bit different than Sunni theology with regard to governance, both political and spiritual governance. So I can't give you like a firm, definitive answer because I haven't really looked at that specifically, but my guess is that it wasn't really about Salafism, but it was an organic movement within Shiite Islam. But I could be wrong about that. That's my guess.
Who else has a question?
I've stunned them.
Really?
Oh, here's one.
So you're not,
Hold that up. Or-
so what I hear you say is that when we hear Muslim extremists, as it's reported on our news, that they're not really extremists, they're just
No,
being
they are not
Muslims.
extremists. They are only extremists from the perspective of westernized, liberalized Muslims. Praise the Lord for those, right? So from the Western perspective, Muslims that you're most likely to meet either don't know about any of this material or this history or this Sharia. They don't know about it. And they learned in Islam on Papa's knee that was be a good person, be honest, and honor the Prophet. There are others who are aware of this material but find that it was only applicable for the 7th century context, and it's not applicable today. Now that's not logically defensible in my opinion, but that's what they think, and more power to them. Okay? So then these guys that we call jihadis or radicals or extremists or terrorists, they are people who are following the scripture as it's written. They're doing what they're commanded to do. Traditional Islamic theology would say that the Quran and the Hadith and the model of the Prophet Muhammad are eternal and applicable at all time, in all places, and among all people. So this Western liberal Islam is rejected by traditional orthodoxy as innovation, bid'ah in Arabic. It's innovation. It's not legitimate Islam. And so it's really hard for moderate or liberal Muslims to win a debate with any of these other guys over what is the true expression of Islam, because the liberals have a very difficult and insurmountable case, if you ask me. Although we would wish they would win the argument, it's a difficult one for them to win.
Who else has a question?
There's the Sunni and the
Shiite.
Shiites. How does that come about?
Okay, let me try to answer that really, really quickly because I could talk a half hour about that. After Muhammad died, there was a battle internally among the Muslims over whether the successor was only a political successor or both a political and spiritual successor. And this group said the successor would be imbued with the same spiritual power and charisma and wisdom that Muhammad had. So it had to be someone in his lineage. And so there was a fight between those groups that lasted till today. So the ones that believed that the successor to Muhammad was only a political leader, a normal human person, those came to be called the Sunnis. The ones that believed that the successor had the same spiritual power and authority of Muhammad because they were of his lineage came to be called the Shiites. Those two terms are shorthand. The Sunni is those who follow after the model of the Prophet, and the Shiite is short for the partisans of Ali, who they put as should have been the first successor, but ultimately became the fourth successor. So the Shiites and the Sunnis today still have that same argument. And they both regard each other as heretical and not really good Muslim. There's a question over there.
Could you go into the 12th Imam?
Okay, you know what I'm going to do? For those of you who weren't here for the first one of these, do you have them on your website, all the addresses from last time? If not, go to my website, which is www.tciis.org. tciis.org. I also have brochures and cards and materials over here on this table that's got more information, including the website. But last time I talked about Shiite Islam, the 12th Imam, Iran, and their quest for a nuclear bomb. And so it's pretty relevant, I think, for today. So if y'all missed that, I could refer you to watch that on my website. So my address about that is there.
Mark, don't you have online classes that you do?
Yes, thank you.
May I pitch it to you?
Okay. I have a class. First, let me say that Joe has an excellent video over here, DVD, called Understanding Islam, where he covers a lot of these same things. What I have is I teach online at currently four different Christian universities. Understanding Islam. I have an online course, and this is not it. And so what I have done is I've taken that course and put it on my website for the general public. And so if you are interested in taking a college semester length course, if you're not interested in that, get Joe's DVD because he's got many hours of good material. If you would like to take a semester length course, I will play this little promotional video for you. Hi, I'm Mark Pfeiffer. I'm founder and director of the Christian Institute of Islamic Studies. Islam is in the news every day, but how much do you really know about Islam? If what you know you learn from politicians or TV commentators, it's likely you've been misled. Currently, the Christian Institute of Islamic Studies is teaching an online course at several Christian universities. It's called Understanding Islam, and now the course is available to you. In this class, you'll learn everything you need to know about Islam. Plus, you'll learn how to effectively share the gospel of Jesus Christ with Muslims. In the class, you'll watch exciting videos about nomadic desert tribes, the life of Muhammad and his wives, the revelations that became the holy book of Islam, the rituals and practices of Muslims, the military expansion of Muslim warriors, splits and movements within Islam, and even mystical and magical practices. See some of the unbelievable things Jesus is doing in the Muslim world. The course also includes almost 50 exciting supplemental videos from around the Muslim world and dozens of maps and photos. All of this course content is available to you to cover at your own pace and in the comfort of your own home. For more
information or to register for the course, visit our website at tciis.org. That's tciis.org. Thank you.
A lot of money to get that actor to do that for me. Anyway, I thank you for allowing me to make that pitch. So we go into much detail during the course of the entire semester. And if you're a Christian and you always wanted to know, well, how do you share the gospel with a Muslim, that course will help you. Joe?
I really have, okay, there we go. I don't have a question, just a little bit of a comment, a little piece of trivia for somebody, for most of you who aren't aware of it. Mark was talking about the Battle of Vienna, where the last Islamic siege was overtaken, where the spread of Islam was finally stopped in 1683. You saw a slide up there. Are you aware of what date that Battle of Vienna started on? Anybody want to venture a guess?
11.
September 11th. Why is that important? Because shame and honor is important in Islamic theology, in Islamic culture. They operate on a shame and honor dynamic. Islam was shamed on September 11th, 1683. That's why September 11th, 2001 happened, to restore the honor and dignity to Islam.
See,
Break time.
y'all need to hang around people like Joe more often. Learn all kind of fascinating things.
We got one more. Okay. Real quick, okay.
Quick, here, can you do a quickie explanation of the two Qurans? The one that the Muslims say is the good book that does not preach the brutality, and the one that the bad guys actually use that preach the brutality. And that has to do with the division from when Muhammad started in Mecca, and he was a failure in Mecca, but when he went to Medina, once he started killing, beheading, do all these wonderful things, he became a very important person.
Okay, so yeah, you clarified. I didn't know what you meant by two Qurans. There's really just one Quran, unless you want to get into the textual history of the Quran and the various versions that happened early on. That's a whole other topic. But what she's talking about is that there's two periods in Muhammad's prophethood, the first 10 years in Mecca, and then the last 10 years or so in Medina. And the verses that were revealed in Mecca were relatively peaceful and accommodating, no compulsion in religion. Jews and Christians, if you're faithful to follow your religion, Allah will accept it from you, these kinds of things. Then when he went to Medina and began to gain political power, the revelations became much more legalistic and militaristic. And so one obscure Muslim scholar from the 20th century has argued that the real Islam is the Islam revealed in the Meccan revelations, and because the world wasn't ready to accept them, God had to revert back to some more primitive tribal instruction like he gave in the Medinan period. But now the world is ready to accept the Meccan revelations, and so we should just eliminate everything that happened in Medina. Of course, he has like 5 people in the world that agree with him. But yeah, so that's, and these verses in Mecca and Medina are completely mixed up all through the Quran. And so you can't like say, okay, I just want to read the Meccan ones, unless you refer to a guide that tells you. They're just like 52 card pickup. They're all just mixed up all together with the Quran. And that's one of the things that makes it difficult to get any sort of coherent thinking out of the Quran, because it's so mixed up.
Okay, we've got to take a break. Wasn't this great?